So there's a kind of underlying historical narrative of libertarianism that is, like I said, rarely championed and rarely attacked. Most people on the left and even on the right just don't even assume. They assume the type of baseline story that you get, which is that, once upon a time we were way too free, and then progressive government came in and saved us all from misery and exploitation and the robber barons and long work weeks. And that narrative is not true. What's up, YouTube? How are you doing? I've been struggling debating a type of video that I wanted to make for my channel, and I think I'm gonna just do a stream of consciousness here just to get it all off my mind. I've wanted to, do something describing my kind of, intellectual bias, right? Where am I coming from when I do whatever it is I'm doing on YouTube? I am a libertarian, and for whatever reason, don't necessarily want to do a video about what is libertarianism. You can Google it. I'll talk about it here, but I don't want to necessarily speak for everyone. I'll give you what I find valuable in it. There's also the question of how did you become a libertarian, and I'll talk about that shortly. The quick answer is Ron Paul. But besides that, I think why I've struggled is because what I care about and what I actually would like to make a video on is why are you a libertarian, which is different from those other questions. Like, I discovered this philosophy when I was 15, 16, in 2007, so why in 2021 do you still consider yourself to be a libertarian? Don't you know about, X, Y, and Z issues? How do you reconcile, your beliefs in this philosophy with the real world and all that? That kind of question of why are you a libertarian is interesting to me. I would love to hear more people talk about that. Why do you have the beliefs you do? Okay, so let's start with the first one. How did you become a libertarian? I became a libertarian in 2007. For whatever reason, I was interested in politics in that 14, 15, 16 age range. And I started watching Bill Maher. I actually started because I watched a comedy special of his. And for whatever reason, his personality type appealed to me, and it's kind of smug, liberal, know-it-all type dude. If you've seen Bill Maher's show or any of his stand-up, you'll understand, what that is. And in 2007, I started watching basically his program. I started watching MSNBC. I started watching, political programming. I was like a default liberal. I use the word liberal because that's what the left called itself back then. There wasn't too many progressives running around. There wasn't too many socialists running around, democratic socialists. No, people just called themselves liberal. And if you remember that kind of 2007 kind of cultural mindset, I was radicalized against George Bush, radicalized against the neocons, against the Iraq War, against these people who used the Patriot Act and FISA courts and, presidential signing statements to just add on the legislation after they were passed. I was a civil libertarian, even though I didn't know that's basically what I was, somebody who cared about civil liberties. Fast forward to the 2008 presidential campaign, I decided to watch the Republican debates that year because I was curious as to, what these people believe. I just never really heard their positions. I had started to watch a little bit of Fox News just to kind of yell at Bill O'Reilly at night, but I decided to watch the Republican debates, and I was blown away by Ron Paul. Ron Paul was the most strident anti-war voice on that stage. You had Dennis Kucinich and Mike Gravel on the Democrat side too, but Ron Paul was saying things to America's war party, right? To the Republican establishment, getting booed damn near out of the damn stadiums or whatever, the stage, saying, you know what, we just marched in Afghanistan, we can just march out. And I thought that was just mind-blowing. And so I started following him. I would watch his YouTube videos. He would talk a lot about the Constitution, how it matters. We need a president who could follow the Constitution. That's what he considered a strong president. That stuff really appealed to me. And eventually, I was won over by him, and he talked a lot about Austrian economics and about, libertarianism. So I went to like the Mises Institute's website. I would always click the video tab and just watch whatever I could. I discovered Tom Woods that way. And, the rest is history, right? I've been a libertarian-ish person ever since. And I will always be grateful to Ron Paul for his bravery during that time, and grateful to the Mises Institute for being, at that time, just a very good venue for introducing anybody who came to it to libertarian ideals, to kind of libertarian economics, libertarian history, and all that good stuff, right? I learned about Austrian economics. So I graduated high school, went to college, finally for the first time in my life met other libertarians, ran a YL chapter, was a student leader with Students for Liberty, SFL. I, brought speakers to campus, did activism, attended conferences, did the whole kind of student activist libertarian thing. So that's how I became a libertarian, and, through there's been whatever, ups and downs, but I, to this day, consider myself to be a libertarian and am proud to have discovered the ideology. So what is a libertarian? The easy answer is a devotion to the non-aggression principle, right? And some people would just kind of end it there. I think there is more to libertarianism than just non-aggression. The non-aggression principle is the idea that it's wrong to initiate force or violence or coercion against another, peaceful person who's, minding their own business and not doing anything to you. And that is, I think most people agree with that on some level. The question is, how long do you extend that? Most people who are part of the West, right, who believe in the Enlightenment ideals or whatever, classical liberals, if you will, believe in a certain equality of kind of moral value of people, right? If you believe in God and are religious, you believe that we are all built in God's image, and therefore we all have certain rights because of that need to be respected. If you are more secular, you believe that we all share a common humanity and that we as humans share a kind of inalienable rights that shouldn't be violated, right? So I think that I'm just getting tired. Libertarianism is presupposing it's presupposing a kind of moral equality, right? And a primacy of the individual, the assumption of self-ownership, that you own yourself and you own what you mix your labor with, and that there needs to be a strong reason, if any reason can, match that test of, there needs to be a strong reason to override those rights. And it's raining, so sorry about that. The final question is, why are you a libertarian? Why do you consider yourself to belong to this philosophy after discovering it, when you were 15? You've discovered the world, you're older now, you've experienced, jobs and, child labor, about the world much more clearly than you did. So why do you hold on to this philosophy that you discovered when you were a 15-year-old? Why am I a libertarian today? I am much more of a consequentialist than most other libertarians, right? I'm less concerned about the kind of deontological, I just described what is a libertarian, and we talked a lot about property rights and non-aggression, all that good stuff. For me, non-aggression and property rights are only valuable if they lead to good things. Most libertarians might agree with that most people say those things are valuable in and of themselves, and I'm not saying they're wrong about that, but I'm somebody that if you could demonstrate to me that a $15 minimum wage eradicated poverty in a way that, say, Bernie Sanders thinks it does, then I would be for it, right? I can be persuaded based on fact and logic and, the demonstration of my failures or whatever. I'm somebody who loves to change his mind. I'm not wedded to, I am wedded to certain principles, but I'm not a kind of blind faith type of guy. I'm just not that person. So again, why am I a libertarian? It's because I've actually become persuaded by the kind of grand historical narrative of libertarianism that I rarely actually hear either defended by libertarians or even attacked by non-libertarians. Which is weird to me because people, I don't know. As a consequentialist, I wish I would see more people talking about this type of stuff. But there's a kind of grand narrative that is at the heart of libertarianism that I think is sound. And I get it from Deidre McCloskey. I read books like The Narrow Corridor, I think is the name of it, that talks about, the supremacy of institutions. Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, and the full name of that book is something like along the lines of an inquiry into the wealth of nations, why some nations are rich while other nations are poor, right? He wanted to find out what is the cause of the enrichment and the differences between nations in terms of their wealth. And I think that question should be the chief question of most of academia, of most people living in the world today in advanced nations, right? We live in a place of, fantastic wealth as opposed to fantastic poverty. Poverty is the default. Child labor, harsh working conditions, long work weeks, all these things have existed for all of recorded human history. How have we escaped it? Explaining that and maybe, popularizing the things that succeeded is, I think, of the most vital import. And the libertarian answer to that question is, in a word, liberty. It's more complicated than that. But Deidre McCloskey argues that what happened is that the masses, just regular people, began to accept commercialism, right? They began to accept trade and innovation and kind of market exchange as a socially acceptable thing that, shouldn't be taxed by a king or, confiscated away from the business person, or, this became something that the masses cheered on. The idea that you should be able to give it a go is what I think she calls it, right? The idea that you should be able to go out in the world and do what you want and not be harassed for it. And if you accept that, what happens is that over time, you create something of value, you trade that value for value, you innovate, others innovate, society gets better. And she argues that that is what explains the great enrichment, right? So if you look at a timeline of human history, it'll be flat for most of human history, and then all of a sudden it just ticks up, right? It'll look like a hockey stick. Explaining that uptick is of vital importance, and she would say that kind of that acceptance of commercialism is what explains that uptick. And I can't recreate her entire argument here. If you've never heard this before, you probably think to yourself, well, what about coal, and what about dynamite, and what about steel, and what about labor unions? Like, weren't they the ones who in technological progress and medicine, weren't those the things that explain you know modernity? And she discusses those things. It's she wrote 3 books on it, big heavy books about this topic, and essentially the argument is that those things happen, those things are important, but they don't explain the progress of humanity, right? Yes, we are all richer, but also billions of more people came into existence in the past century, and those people are richer as well, right? There's like a factor of 40 is the increase in well-being that humans have experienced over the past 2 centuries, right? And explaining, yeah, coal and steel don't explain that. People had coal and steel, for years. China had that stuff. What they didn't have was a respect for markets, respect for merchants, right? And you saw this arise for in first the Dutch, I believe. Well, I think she said it was like French academics first, and then the Dutch, and then of course Britain, who spread it to everyone else. And yeah, is there a history of oppression and death and evil things in our past? Yes, but there's also this story of enrichment, of empowerment of minorities and of women, and the improvement of life for most people. Well, for many people, right? As opposed to just always exploitation and death and rape and misery, right? And the driver of that progress, whatever it is, I think is worth studying and worth championing. And I don't think that most libertarians do a good enough job in the championing of progress, right? And because for many libertarians, they don't. It's not fair to say they don't care about the progress, but for many of them, they arrive at their libertarianism through a kind of set of priors and axioms, and those things are fine. But for them, they just don't see it in this way, and I do. I think, and it's worth championing the actual good stuff that liberty does, as opposed to just the kind of arcane, logical, deductive. You get what I mean, hopefully. So that's why I'm a libertarian. There's a libertarian historical narrative that I think is very strong, very well argued. There's plenty of social science out there. I know that I kind of mix in Deidre McCluskey's work along with the work of the institutionalists like Darren Acemoglu, who wrote The Narrow Corridor and Why Nations Fail. And there's been other writers along these lines. I can't remember the names, but yeah, who essentially agree with what I'm saying here. There's also other scholars, social scientists, that try to look into what it is that markets do. Like, do they make us worse people, or do they make us better, right? And while there's not a lot of work along those lines, but Paul Zak, Herbert Gentis have done this work of like looking into like what markets do to us, in terms of our reciprocity, in terms of charity and generosity, and markets actually make us better, it turns out. So there's a kind of underlying historical narrative of libertarianism that is, like I said, rarely championed and rarely attacked. Most people on the left and even on the right just don't even assume. They assume the type of baseline story that you get, which is that, once upon a time we were way too free, and then progressive government came in and saved us all from misery and exploitation and the robber barons and long work weeks. And that narrative is not true. Some of it is true, right? Yes, labor unions and government action did pass laws, like those laws are on the books, sure. But when you actually look at, say, the decrease of child labor in this country, you will see that most of the decrease happened prior to the Federal Labor Standards Act, right? You will see that OSHA deaths OSHA deaths, but like workplace, injuries or whatever was decreasing for a while. And then we passed OSHA and they kept decreasing, stuff like that. Where if you actually look into the data with a little bit more nuance, you will find, oh, it's not just this clear night and day. We were too free, and then the government came in, and now we're saved from our own freedom. So that is why I'm a libertarian, how I became a libertarian, and a bit of what libertarianism is. Thanks for watching.